Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. It is post-Wimbledon clay court season. Probably the worst part of the entire tennis calendar, but I still think a very fun show. Lots to dig into. We turn the page on Wimbledon. We look ahead to the US Open at the end of the show. I get to your comments. Before that, it is the first installment of the US Open Power Rankings. The journey starts here, right here in Atlanta. I'm not in Atlanta. I don't know why I said right here, but it is July 22nd. So we will start counting down the days, so to speak, in the form of power rankings to Flushing, Queens at the end of August. But start today's show with a political topic, which I don't do very often because I understand that I'm much more well-equipped. I have much more expertise in talking about why Nadal should hit a forehand down the line than I am on something that involves tennis politics. Or something that's a little bit more worldly. But I do think that this is important enough to at least touch on quickly. I have a very simple point to make about equal prize money in tennis. Of course, this was brought about by the Women's World Cup in France, coinciding with Wimbledon this year, and as the cries rose for equal prize money in women's soccer, it drew comparisons to women's tennis, which of course is, to my knowledge, the only women's sport that earns equal prize money when compared with men. So then over the weekend, I read this Guardian article by Andrew Anthony. The crux of the article goes back to an argument that's not very original, but of course resurfaced by this article about how women play best of 3 sets in majors and men play best of 5 sets in majors. And the mantra equal work for equal pay, which in Anthony's opinion is a very noble and valuable mantra, doesn't actually apply to tennis. The basis of the piece puts a microscope on the Wimbledon Finals, which contrasted in length. You had Djokovic and Federer going 4 hours, 57 minutes. Meanwhile, you had Simona Halep beating Serena Williams in under an hour, 56 minutes to be exact. And this is an argument that even the likes of Rafa and Nadal has made, that the men in the majors are actually playing for longer periods of time, but earning the same amount of money. That is one of, I guess, 2 arguments kind of against equal pay in tennis. The other is one that was peddled by Novak Djokovic a few years back, that talks about the fact that men draw more than women. Now, I'm going to start with that one. I'm going to move on to the best of 5 versus best of 3. But honestly, my point that I'm about to make is more overarching when it comes to this entire discussion. But when it comes to the drawing power, well, yes, men on average draw more than men's tennis, gets higher ratings and draws larger audiences than women's tennis. But what about when it doesn't? In the first week of Wimbledon, Coco Gauff was the number 1 draw. She drew the highest TV ratings. I know that for a fact in England. I know that for a fact in the United States of America, and it was probably pretty universal that Coco Gauff was the number 1 draw. So unless you are creating a system that bases prize money on ratings and audience sizes itself, it is a completely infeasible way to look at prize money. Not to mention the fact that most tennis players make the majority of their money on endorsement money, and that is directly related to popularity. And Roger Federer is a top 5 richest athlete in the world, according to Forbes, not because of the measly prize money that he earns in tennis in comparison to the enormous amount of winnings that he makes from his sponsors like Rolex and Wilson, Nike, and others. So popularity does matter in the earnings of a tennis player, just not in prize money. When it comes to the best of 5 set versus best of 3 set argument, and most people point to the fact that women are willing to play best of 5 sets, but let's not even go there. I don't really want to delve into this because why? Let's just say it is a valid argument. Let's say that that men are underpaid compared to women in majors of tennis tournaments in a vacuum. And let's say that that is actually the case. How could you work up the energy to get upset about that? Women in the United States of America, and I'm sure it is like this in a lot of other places in the world, they make 80 cents on the dollar. And we're going to get upset if, let's say, they're overpaid in tennis. They should make a banner that says women are overpaid in tennis. Like, how is this a bad thing if it's true? Perhaps in tennis, one of the few places in the world where men get the short slice of the pie by a little bit. Maybe that's true. And if it is, well, tennis is one of the it stands almost alone. Tennis would stand alone. And I know there was a comment that said, okay, well, what about the porn industry? Okay, there you go. You found another. The point is, it is simply impossible for me to get worked up about women making too much money compared to men in the world that we live in. And it is a badge of honor. It is one of the things to be proud of about this sport. Equal prize money. And in my opinion, I have nothing to back this up. It draws women to this sport. And I don't think anyone would disagree that that's a good thing. Both talking about TV audiences, tournament attendance, young people playing the sport, which makes them more likely to make women's tennis exciting when, the few that reach the highest level. I mean, that's a good thing. You don't think that young girls are inspired to play tennis because this sport pays them equal prize money? You don't think that? That's not a good thing. You don't think people watch? You don't think more people watch because they actually appreciate that? I think it's a good thing, regardless of if it's fair. The world isn't fair. Since when are we dealing in fairness here? There is not fairness in this world. So that is that. Let's go on to the U.S. Open power rankings. Okay, this is the July 22nd edition. There are many stops on the U.S. Open series. The first one is Atlanta. Then we go to the City Open in Washington, D.C. Then we go to the Rogers Cup in either Montreal or Toronto. I think Toronto this year for the men. Then we go to Cincinnati before going to Flushing. So on each week of Monday Match Analysis, we will revisit this power rankings. But we start with this edition, July 22nd. Number one for audio, I will read it off. Number one is Novak Djokovic, and that is actually a mistake. Number two is Roger Federer. Number three is Rafael Nadal. Number four is Dominic Thiem. Number five is Stefanos Tsitsipas. Number six is Kei Nishikori. Number seven is Roberto Bautista Agut. Number 8 is Daniil Medvedev. Number 9 is John Isner. And number 10 is Gael Monfils. So once again, it was actually my intention to put Roger Federer at number 2 and Nadal at number 3. But on the graphic here, it is reversed. So let's go through this power ranking now. We start with Novak Djokovic, winner of 4 out of the last 5 Grand Slams or majors. And of course, the world number 1, reigning Wimbledon champ, reigning U.S. Open champ. I won't go any deeper than that. Number 2 is Roger Federer. He has Rafa Nadal's number off clay, which was enough to put him above Nadal in this power ranking, although I got the graphic wrong. And he's playing the best tennis since 2017. He showed really great form at Wimbledon. Number 3 is Nadal, and I do take into account the U.S. Open hard courts and how slow they can be, so how skewed towards power they can be and how physical they are. The reason Nadal is number 3 and the main thing to watch out for is he still hasn't been healthy for an extended period of time on hard courts in the last 2-3 seasons. Number 4 is Dominic Thiem, Indian Wells champion, dangerous on any slow hard court, which he showed. And since his showing last year against Nadal at the U.S. Open, when he went 5 strong sets before, and that's when, before Nadal's knee blew up on him to the point where he couldn't continue. Dominic Thiem, I said after that, I hope that he builds on that performance because it really showed his potential. And since then, with head coach Nicolas Massu, he's worked on his shot selection in a way where he is making very few errors, and he has such a powerful game off the ground. The U.S. Open is the most physical major, and I do believe that he's actually a major threat. Unlike Wimbledon, at the U.S. Open, Dominic Thiem re-enters the mix. Number 5, Stefanos Tsitsipas, Australian Open semi-finalist, and among people on this list, I don't think there's anyone below him with a better mental game than Tsitsipas. Number 6 is Kei Nishikori, quietly on a run, 6 consecutive majors, losing to the big 3 in the quarterfinals or further. The last time Kei Nishikori didn't lose to a big 3 member in a major, it was Dominic Thiem on clay. The time before that was Kevin Anderson at the U.S. Open. So Nishikori is on a very long run where he's really beating everyone. And there's something to be said for that. And a lot of the times maybe I throw some shade at Nishikori because he sometimes seems so helpless against the big 3, but really that's a very, very respectable position to be in, and you just never know what might happen. And that's how Kei Nishikori Kei Nishikori beat Djokovic, found himself in a U.S. Open final. So I do think these are also pretty good conditions for Nishikori, and you just never know what's going to happen at the top. Couple injuries, couple upsets might be all it takes for Nishikori, although it's unlikely, which is why he's at number 6. Number 7, Roberto Bautista Agut came out the gates firing in 2019. He's currently 7th in the race. And following up that really strong semifinal run at Wimbledon, I mean, RBA, he is a solid top 10 player right now and has been really all year, even if the rankings are yet to reflect that. Number 8 is Daniil Medvedev. He led the ATP in wins going into the clay court season. So on hard courts, Medvedev was beating everyone, and I think it's important just to harken back to that time. Clay and grass, and I actually think Medvedev should be good on grass, but especially clay, it hindered his momentum, but certainly deserves to be in this top 10 given his form going into clay court season. John Isner, kind of always a factor, coming off injury, hasn't accomplished much this year so far after getting hurt in Miami, but this is his favorite time of year, and now we're going to see, is the John Isner decline, is that real, or did he just need his favorite time of year to come around? So let's see if he's healthy. Let's see if he's as hard to beat as he normally is at this time of year. It might be kind of an omen that Isner comes into this time of year so well rested, coming off that foot injury. And number 10 is Gael Monfils. So his level was blowing my mind, if you remember, after the Australian Open on the hard courts. And I was singing the praises of Gael Monfils, and I was saying he is a changed man. And then he got injured. Then clay court season came around. Grass court season came around. He is not good on grass court at all. But I was thinking to myself, should I make Gael Monfils number 10? And I needed someone to kind of confirm for me, because I'm like, am I crazy Am I crazy to think that he played that well in the beginning of the season that I'm going to put him in the top 10? So I just checked his ELO rating, which is a tennis abstract metric on hard courts. And just so I had someone to back me up on how well Gael Monfils was playing, ELO rating takes into account the last 52 weeks. On hard court, Gael Monfils was 6th. And that, my friends, is the U.S. Open Power Rankings July 22nd. So once again, it is Djokovic, it is Federer, then Nadal, Thiem, Tsitsipas, Nishikori, RBA, Medvedev, Isner, Monfils, and I'm sure it will change. I got to see something from Sasha Zverev. Fact that he's not in there, I mean, it might be a little bit overkill by me, but I got to say, he's got to win some matches. That's all. I'm sure, if he can just win some matches, he will be in this top 10 because I know how talented Sasha Zverev is. But until then, he starts outside of the U.S. Open Power Rankings. So time to get to the comments. I'm just going to read them off my phone. Drinking a little tea today, iced tea. And we're off. Some of this is about equal prize money, and I simply don't want to belabor it. So some of these comments I might just read and not even respond to. Top comment is Gold Wolf. He says a few points. Prize money should be less for women until they play best of 5. This is simple anti-sexism. Equal pay for less work is sexism for women. And my point is I don't care about sexism for women. Prize money should be less for women until they draw crowds to the same degree that men do. That is just simple economics. Endorsement money is less, and prize money is not. Again, I've made my stance clear on that. Next comment is from Drew. He says, "Hello, Gill. Will Nadal beat Djokovic, or will Nadal beat again Djokovic and Federer except on clay?" Little recall, 2-14 against Djokovic since 2011 and 0-6 against Federer since 2015. Very alarming for me. This year he was great during Australian Open and Wimbledon, but since he played Djokovic or Federer, his level dropped significantly. Your thoughts? Thanks. Thanks, Drew. My main response to this comment is I agree wholeheartedly. To me, it was very strange. The pattern that Nadal followed for both the Australian Open and Wimbledon, simply blowing his opponents off the court, showing this incredibly impressive form, and then dipping in level when he faced Djokovic in the final of the Aussie and Federer in the semifinal at Wimbledon. So certainly an alarming pattern, and also an alarming pattern that he's struggling against his chief rivals, as Steve Flink said in our interview, off of clay courts. And you probably want me to conjure up an explanation. I have very little, but here's a thought. It is a very different kind of pressure that Nadal is under when he plays someone like Federer or Djokovic who can begin to match his skill set. And Nadal is used to reacting a certain way to this pressure and falling on possibly some of his older attributes that, that's his natural instinct, to rely on his speed, to rely on his defense, to put more shape on his forehand, to get more net clearance, to begin to grind. And that's a play style that he became very mentally strong and very confident in that play style. And now in the big moments, in the pressure moments, he's attempting to lean on other skills. And for some reason, the new play style, the adaptation of Nadal's game, has been brilliant on clay, has been brilliant against everyone else, but under pressure against his rivals off clay courts, he hasn't executed. The shot making just hasn't been there. The backhand, which was exceptionally aggressive throughout all of the Australian Open, throughout all of Wimbledon, at least it's fresh in my mind against Federer. That shot was just it didn't show up. It wasn't there. So it's something that Nadal probably just needs to simply work out mentally, and I'm sure everyone in his camp knows that. If anyone can do it, it's Rafa. Um, the next comment is from Jose Moreno. Can Dominic Thiem win the U.S. Open? How do you rate his chances? So you got a kind of a preview of my thoughts on this when I went through the power rankings, but I'm glad you asked this question because it's kind of one of the main things I want to really hammer home. It's one of my most confident opinions going into the U.S. Open series, is especially the way the U.S. Open played last year. I mean, Dominic Thiem, he's right there. He can win the thing. I think absolutely yes. On a slow hard court, he can win. The U.S. Open, it plays slow. It's tougher on the body because it's hard court, so it's more wear and tear. And the conditions are often challenging, sometimes high humidity. A lot of the times, a lot of heat. Just ask Roger Federer, and it got the best of him against John Millman last year. So it takes someone who's supremely equipped for a physical brand of tennis to fight through slow, hard court conditions in high humidity and a lot of heat. And Dominic Thiem, in my opinion, right now is the most physical player on tour. I'll also add he probably matches up pretty well with the most threatening player on tour right now, Novak Djokovic. He plays a similar style to Stan Wawrinka, and he's able to. He's not bothered very much by depth. He doesn't really rely on gaining too much of an advantage from big first serves. He has the kind of serve that could trouble Novak, actually. And, because so far this year, Djokovic has had trouble kind of with handling the kick serve to his backhand for some reason against Federer and against Thiem at the French Open. So I think he's a major factor. And I think that's one of the main differences between the outlook we had going into Wimbledon and the outlook we had going into the U.S. Open is I think Dominic Thiem once again plays a massive factor if the courts are going to play as slow as they did last year. Dominic Thiem's playing great this year. It's a huge leap for him. And the U.S. Open should reward him those kind of conditions. Closest conditions to the U.S. Open might be Indian Wells, and Dominic Thiem came through that, won the title. Danilo Rodriguez asks, would Rafa have beaten Novak in the Wimbledon final? I don't see how you could say that. I mean, look, Djokovic didn't bring his best, but given the streak and the trouble that Nadal has had with Djokovic off of clay courts, I don't see how you could say that in the Wimbledon final Nadal would have won. I think Nadal would have a better chance on a U.S. Open hard court if healthy than he would. Even though he probably prefers Wimbledon, I still think Djokovic at this point in his career where his main struggles are probably with, or I think this year his main struggles are probably with creating offense off of his forehand wing, which we saw over the course of the clay court season, I think, a lot. Given that as Djokovic's probably his main weakness right now, I would think that Nadal would have, the slower the court, the better the chance Nadal would have, despite Nadal's aggressive adaptations. Frank Mancuso, male porn stars make nothing compared to women, and we have to do most of the work. Caleb Pereira, he says, this is long, I might shorten it. WTA and ATP are separate companies. They're able to redistribute equally, or they're not able to redistribute equally, is his point. So the problem now is that even though the WTA makes less money, they are paying the top women as much as top men. This results in lower women being paid far less than lower men. Hence, equal pay is actually damaging women's tennis. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's true. it's not really sourced, this information, but what Caleb is saying is that on the kind of the challenger level, that women's prize money is lower, and I don't know if that's true or not. Sean says, do you think Djokovic will stay at number one until July 2020 to get most weeks at number one? Also, how important is the Olympics in the GOAT debate? Will Djokovic be the favorite? That's a good question. I do think Djokovic will remain number one. Right now, don't oversee anyone. I don't see anyone overtaking that spot from him. The Olympics is very important because it's a separator, and it's so rare. It's so rare that not everyone is going to finish with Olympic titles. So right now, Djokovic would be the favorite in the Olympics, and yeah, that's an important legacy builder, because it's probably as sought after as a major title, but it only comes around once every 4 years. So yeah, it's important, but it's practically, everyone understands that there's less sample size to work with when it comes to the Olympics. So it's almost like bonus points. Almost like bonus points is the Olympics. Alexa asks or says, fun fact, Federer has won 15 Grand Slams in one decade between 2001 and 2010. Djokovic won also 15 slams in the period 2011 through 2020. Well, that period's not over yet. But this U.S. Open is the last Grand Slam in this decade. I see, 2011 to 2020. Wouldn't you, that's not a full decade though, because what about next year? But the point is, if Djokovic wins the U.S. Open, regardless, he passes Federer in this decade. So he passes Federer in the 2011 to 2020. That would be his 16th slam, where Federer won 15, 2001 to 2010. So would Djokovic be the most dominant decade in the history of tennis? Yes, probably. I don't know if Djokovic went on the runs or the streaks that Federer went on from 2003 to, or not really, from 2004 to 2006. The run that Roger Federer went on, I don't know if Djokovic ever matched that. So I don't know if Djokovic was ever as dominant, or I mean, he did have years. I don't know if Djokovic matched that, but in this grand scheme of the entire decade, and given the challengers that he had in Nadal and Federer, I would say that this is probably the most dominant decade in the history of tennis. But at the same time, I mean, he really did have a lot of really good competition, with especially in the early stages with Federer and Nadal. I guess in the beginning stages and the end stages, there were 2 years there, 2015, 2016, where Andy Murray was his main challenger. Okay, Gold Wolf's early U.S. Open power rankings was, he says, I'm just going to quote him, Lukovic, the guy who owned Djokovic in the Wimbledon final, but choked 2 championship points away, so that is Federer. God of Clay, Nadal. RBA, Dominator, so Dominic Thiem, 6, Stanimal, Nick Kyrgios at number 7, Kei, Mr. Quarterfinals, Nishikori at number 8, and 9 is Serve Bots, Isner, Anderson, Query, in no particular order. Moving on to Mahak. Mahak asked, do you think anyone outside the big three can win the U.S. Open this year? Perhaps Tsitsipas, Wawrinka, or Thiem. I think that it's far more feasible than it would be at Wimbledon, because Wawrinka and Thiem are way better on hard courts, especially a slow hard court, than they are on grass, and that's probably true for Tsitsipas as well. All three of those players have a ton of firepower off the ground, which will be very important if the U.S. Open courts play as slow as they do last year. Harry asks, is it physiologically possible for a player to play highest level of tennis beyond the ages of 38-40. It's a fact that one's hand-eye coordination begins to see a marked drop around that age. This should negatively affect ground stroke timing immensely, right? Gill, do you believe Federer's hand-eye coordination will drop and will be able to play at top 10 level even if he is physically fit in a year or a couple years' time? I'm not a doctor, which so I mean, I don't really understand fully the science behind this, but I would say observationally, Federer's back and his knees are a way bigger threat to how long he can stay competitively than his hand-eye coordination, because I've simply seen no decline in his hand-eye coordination, especially the way he's playing now on the rise, the way he's hitting over more backhand returns. I mean, at the age of 37, about to turn 38, I've seen no decline in his hand-eye coordination. So I'd be very surprised if we see a sudden dip in that category. Will Rafa win a tournament? Ryan asks, will Rafa win a tournament between now and the start of clay season next year? Given that he cannot beat Novak or Roger away from clay, I would say no. I think if he's healthy, yes, he's too good not to. He's going to figure it out. Neil asks, everyone thinks that Novak has 4 levels, such as average good, high level, God mode. Do you agree with that? And who do you think has the highest ever level? I mean, no, I think Novak has an average below that. I think he has bad, which is honestly a level that I don't know if we see as often from Nadal, and I don't know if we see as often from Federer. I think Djokovic at times can be worse than them when he is, when he had his issues, I guess you could say, in 2016. And if you think, and then even after he came back in, I don't want to get my years confused, but think about his last 2 performances at Indian Wells. One where he lost to Taro Daniel and couldn't make a ball, and this last one, much more respectable, against Philip Kohlschreiber. That's closer to average, where he seemed like he had no cardio and was out of shape. But yeah, then again, he certainly has God mode, and I do believe his highest level is higher than Federer and Nadal's highest level. Probably a bit of a controversial statement, but I do believe in it. Let's do a few more. George Joshua says, no, we don't want women playing best of 5 sets. Move on to the next one. And Terry. Hi, Gill. Do you think it is a coincidence why Federer has lost 22 matches after having match points? I personally believe it is absolutely not a coincidence, but it has to do with that he is not as strong and focused as Novak and Rafa. This comment goes longer, but I want to just answer it now already to save some time. I think that Roger has the 3rd strongest mental game. I think Djokovic's mental game is probably number 1 when he's motivated, but less consistently motivated than Nadal. But Nadal has worse nerve management than Djokovic. Djokovic is a steely competitor when it comes to nerve management. So I don't know if Djokovic or Nadal is number 1 in the mental department. It's hard to say, but I think Federer's number 3 for sure. Hi, Gill. Do you think the crowd at Wimbledon, Praveen asks, is paid, Roger Pro, or are they genuine? Also, what's your take on Novak not doing his usual celebration after winning the final? To Novak's celebration, I thought it was kind of a boss move, to be honest. And I completely get it. He just didn't feel like giving the crowd a celebration. And I've criticized Novak for giving the crowd what they're looking for. And that is kind of actually, physically showing disgust with the crowd for rooting against him. And I don't like it when Djokovic does that. I think that it feeds into the problem that he has. And I think that it's just egging on the crowd to root against him even harder, because it's showing the crowd, who wants his opponent to win, that the crowd is bothering him. And in this match, he finally didn't show that to the crowd, and he maintained kind of the stoicism. So I kind of liked the reaction. And no, the Wimbledon crowd is not paid pro Roger. They pay to get into center court. Wimbledon does not pay them. Wimbledon wants to make money just like everyone wants to make money. Lil Bird, Rafa to win on U.S. Open slow courts. Rickard, if women are capable to play best of 5 sets in slams and bring the same amount of revenue that men do, sure. It's not about equality. It's about simple numbers. Okay, let's do a couple more. There was one interesting one that said that Djokovic not showing emotion was bad for his game, and that made him flat. It's interesting. I'm trying to think. Fed's forehand has let him down in key moments against Novak in their last encounters. Certainly true in the first set tiebreak, and certainly true on the first match point. Let's see. Do you think knee problem will flare up for Rafa? Maybe. I can't predict something like that. I heard Delpo is coming back at Los Cabos. I did not hear that, but I hope you're right. But that would seem very, very quick for Delpo, because I think he just started hitting. But really rooting for Delpo to come back. Would he be ready for the U.S. Open? Again, I'm not going to predict someone's health because I have no idea. And let's do one last one. Byron asks, hi Gil, perhaps optimistic, but would you say there's any chance the Laver Cup can develop a reputation in the distant future, maybe 15, 20 years down the line, to something near the Ryder Cup that is loved by so many, as I believe it has the formula to do so and become a major part of the tennis calendar? And what would you say it has to do, if not? I agree. I think the Laver Cup, I think team tennis is something that actually brings out the players' personalities. And if done right, people can really get behind. I also think when you kind of bring a Davis Cup atmosphere to tennis, it really adds something, and it makes the entertainment value go way up. So if they do Laver Cup correctly, and doubles is as fun and as much of a factor as it was last year, because doubles brings out personality, team tennis brings out personality, crowd brings entertainment value. I do love the Laver Cup, and I do think as it develops, it should become a valuable part of the tennis calendar. 37 minutes we've went today on Monday Match Analysis. That's it until next week. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.